Welcome to the next in our series as we cycle through. We tell the story so far of the Rugby World Cup. In previous videos we've covered Rugby World Cup 1987 in Australia and New Zealand, or New Zealand and Australia, as the case, I believe it was really. We had the final after all. And Rugby World Cup 1991 in England, Wales, Ireland, Scotland and France. The remaining available nations in the world of rugby that was the International Rugby Football Board. Of course, South Africa not being available because of apartheid. The All Blacks would win in 87, not 91. We wanted to win in 91, of course, but the enemy, well, across the ditch enemy, Australia would take the crown in 91. And from that period, as we look forward now, a lot was happening around the world. A lot was happening in the world of rugby as we consider in light. Myself, I had moved north by the time Rugby World Cup 1995 had arrived. But through this period, I'd been in Auckland, out to Christchurch, and then north to Palmerston North, as the journey with the family took its due course. And so this period, both culturally, internationally, and politically, geopolitically even, and as it relates to the rugby flow for an All Blacks unit, there was so much happening, so much we can say, so much we could cover. And what was significant, maybe most significant to this period, was what transpired or what began around 1990 when the government of F.W. de Klerk in South Africa just waved hello to some cyclists who are out doing their kilometres in the countryside, and initiated discussions with the ANC's Nelson Mandela, and apartheid was given the good old heave ho. Wonderful, wonderful new dawn for the Springbok rugby fraternity, obviously what that would mean, but even more so, wonderful for a nation to move on from a hideous and heinous past and to put that where it firmly belongs and to seek a better and brighter future. The nation that would come to be defined by a new flag and a rainbow people group, a rainbow nation as they became known, of people of every tribe, colour and tongue, so to speak, using that type of language to indicate just the diversity that was part of the Springbok nation, or South Africa. So to stop there and did it very late. One lane bridge, always fun and games. And so that was a development of the wider range in 1990, which would sort of come into view in 1992 for the return test. The 80s had been about the All Blacks and the Springboks trying to play each other. The 90s would signal a return to the ultimate rugby rivalry between New Zealand and South Africa, between the All Blacks and the Springboks. The return test was tacked on the end, I believe, of a tour of Australia, and a difficult and challenging one. The Wallabies were on top through this period. They had grown into 91, and now they were beginning to find their feet, and the All Blacks were struggling to be able to put it together. There wasn't the type of playing or player continuity, and even I remember selections which made you scratch your head. However, the return test would be one that the All Blacks would win, and it was a significant occasion. I packed out Ellis Park. One name that sort of was a blast for the past for me was Dani Gerber, the outside centre for the Springboks. Pretty well aged at that point, but still you could see the ability that he had. There was such a mystique growing up for me with Springbok rugby, not only because of the confrontations with the All Blacks, but even the magical names, or the mystical names, the distinctive pronunciations that were so different from my own. And these factors, the distance and the challenge, created a sense of occasion and a sense of anticipation, which was now returning. So the World Rugby had one of the big players back as part. So now that they're back, now they're available for what will unfold into the future in Rugby World Cup. What do you do? Well, it seems like the best way to signal that return is to give them a Rugby World Cup. And so they would host Rugby World Cup 1995, the first Rugby World Cup in one singular nation. Again in May and June. Again, it was a bit later, I believe, when it was moved to later in the year. But the conditions in the Republic generally ideal, which is quite interesting when I consider what happened in one semi-final and the impact on that final result. It's a Rugby World Cup that will be remembered for probably many reasons. I remember it for how the All Blacks performed, but I even remember it more so probably for events surrounding the final, which would reverberate for such a long period and would colour commentary post the event, and would become a talking point, a rallying cry for either side or for either nation. But what led into it? Well, as I mentioned, the All Blacks weren't performing, and things weren't really tracking very well for Laurie Mains and company. However, as 95 would rear its head, maybe even 94, I'm just trying to think of the exact date of when this test transpired, but there's one test versus Canada. I remember the Canadian jerseys, they were quite, I don't know how to describe it, they were just different. We had some players who were coming through. One would be my favourite for a decent while, Andrew Mehrtens, one whose Kiwi parents would spend time in the Republic and so would be born in that land, and he was one out of Canterbury, played a position that I played, and was doing some pretty significant things on the rugby field. So I was pretty excited about Mehrtens. So when he rose in this period and was given the first five, the fly half, that was a positive addition. But the one who grew through these years, and one who became larger than life, and one who is not with us as I make these videos, is Jonah Lomu. Jonah Lomu, the first global superstar of rugby, the man who so many have heard of, the man who provided highlight clip after highlight clip, the man whose gifts were as prodigious as his body parts, a man who was as light on his feet as he was forceful and powerful through contact, a man who had the speed of a 100-metre runner and the power of a weightlifter, a man who defied expectations, a man who defied your own visual intake. I mean, this man could do things that just seemed to defy. and he loved playing for the All Blacks. It was one who encapsulated all that you'd say the All Black ethos stood for. His start was really young. He was not even really out of school, and he began to make his mark through sevens and then into 15s. And I remember one tackle, I can't even remember the exact, if it was a possibles versus probables. Possibles, yeah, let's have two teams with the same name. And Norm Hewitt, the man who backed up Sean Fitzpatrick for so many test matches, he ran at Jonah, and Jonah picked him up and dumped him. This man who had been placed on the wing, who played loose forward for his Wesley College, but who had just this prodigious gifts, and those who had scouted and saw his talent understood that they could be better utilised outside. And yet his first selection into the All Blacks versus France didn't go well. He didn't know the position. He didn't understand what he was required to do, really, where he was required to position himself. Those basics were foreign to his understanding. One, he was very young, and two, he hadn't played really any much wing, and so it was, pretty much you could say wasn't really fair on the young man. And so he was quickly in and then quickly out. However, he wasn't out for that long, and in his return we would understand and we would see why he was so early celebrated and venerated. So leading into the Rugby World Cup, against that, getting back to that test versus Canada, there was something new about the All Blacks. Man, it's not too dissimilar. Different players, of course, different emphases, but there was a freshness that hadn't been there previously about an All Blacks unit that is similar to 2023, or what has been. We have that same sense. Different players, not a Jonah Lomu. However, those who seem to be able to offer much more than what has been. And so when Rugby World Cup 1995 began, the All Blacks weren't necessarily as celebrated or expected to take things out. And the first match, I remember the first match, the Springboks putting one over the Wallabies. That was the proverbial cat amongst the pigeons, and that probably signalled a tournament that was going to be reasonably spectacular. The round robin matches, it's funny actually, when maybe we don't realise how monolithic rugby has been until we actually talk about the events. One of the reasons why I don't remember round robin matches at the Rugby World Cup outside the All Blacks is because most of them go to form or go to the script. And so the more that rugby has become competitive, the more that we see the potential for those lower ranked to take on the big boys. And the more that we do see that, and hopefully we'll see that in 2023, the better it is for the code. I probably should mention, just as I remember, the increasing number of nations who wanted to come to Rugby World Cup 1995, excuse me. And so again, the world of rugby is growing. Rugby World Cup is gaining momentum. It's going down, it's rolling down the side of the mountain. It's becoming an avalanche for the code. So what are the matches post that opening and post that beginning? Well, I remember the All Blacks because of how they played. I remember the Irish contest in particular, and Jonah being unleashed on the outside, finding Josh Kronfeld on the inside. I remember the exuberance of the Japanese contest, or one-sided exuberance. It was less than a training run, and scoring such a mammoth number meant that, for those maybe who don't know the nuances of rugby, there was something about this All Blacks unit that was growing. Of course, we know what would transpire in the semi-final. The quarter-final wasn't as dominant probably as what I would have wanted for the All Blacks versus Scotland. I beat Scotland a little bit at that time, but they still won well. But it just wasn't as efficient. It wasn't as disciplined. Plenty of play, plenty of use of the ball. It's the semi-final. I mean, if you think of the matches that are memorable, even both semi-finals, but particularly the All Blacks semi-final, because of what would transpire with Jonah. And it'll be remembered for that one try, the trampling of Cat, and what he was able to accomplish. Where the All Blacks were unstoppable. Captain Carling, good old Will, was pretty gracious. Good lad, Will. A little bit of engagement with good old Will, and he is a fan of things down this way, and so he was pretty realistic about what transpired and what could be done about it. And the All Blacks were the bully who could not be stopped, and they were just playing rugby like it should be played, and using the ball, finding space. This is an English team that made the semi-final because they'd beaten the Wallabies in the quarter-final. I remember that now. They dropped goal from Rob Andrew, and so they were confident. I mean, that's a little sign for certain nations that it could be their year. But Jonah and the All Blacks, shoved England in the whale, and they were out to sea very, very quickly. And so the All Blacks were in the Rugby World Cup final. The other semi-final, I think it was in Cape Town. Rain. I mean, can you rain that much? Certainly found it in a short span of time. And yes, there can always be debate about whether or not they should have played that test match. The amount of standing water. I think if it wasn't a Rugby World Cup match, or maybe if it wasn't a Rugby World Cup match at the hosts, because of the hosts and their home location status, you may not get away with that, because you wouldn't have that type of pressure maybe. And then what happened in the 80, the try at the end is really what I'm thinking of. I thought the French had taken it. Another one of those could have been. And how the referee saw it, how he got there, and it was wet, of course, and through the water, and well, it's a bit of folklore maybe. And so it's going to be a final in South Africa between the hosts, the South African Springboks, versus the New Zealand All Blacks. Can you get any better than that? The tournament had been a success, obviously, to that point. It had been significant. Chester Williams on the wing for the Springboks. Again, rugby was viewed as being the instrument of white South Africa, and football very much for the black or coloured community. And so his selection had been significant. And what would transpire around the final? Nelson Mandela, the number 6 jersey, of course, of the captain for the Springboks, Francois Pienaar. The focus for a nation that had been broken, a nation that had been fractured, a nation that needed healing. I mean, that's really the storyline. It's easy for Kiwis like myself to talk about other things and to get caught up And in real time, as a young man who wasn't even 20 yet, it was pretty difficult to take. I remember getting up and watching, and pretty numb after the fact. We had a family come around. Little did I know that she actually was, excuse me, South African. There was a bit of an accent, but I didn't pick it up at that point. And I remember her trying to console me afterwards, trying to encourage me, you know, with those things that you know, some people say, those, oh, it'll be okay, and things like that. And I was, yeah, pretty stunned. And then afterwards, as a young man, and what was talked about, what came out after the fact, just added to the narrative. But what of the final? Well, leading up to it in that week, it was all about Get Jonah. And you hear stories about what transpired, what was taking place in the hotel, and trying to wake the All Blacks up with, you know, all manner of things, people driving past, and alarms, and fun and games. I mean, those things are, you know, you can understand, I guess, in, you know, parochialism and those type of realities. But it was all about Get Jonah. I know post the final, you know, there are those who take, you know, great pride in what transpired, and yeah, they did do a good defensive number. There's one moment when, talking about officiating, Ed Morrison was a referee from England. There was one moment when Jonah broke free. He called him back for a forward pass. I haven't watched the game again, but at the time I watched it pretty closely, and with my father, it looked pretty flat to me. However, it's all gone now. Called forward, ruled forward, and so it is forward. And it was a tight match, a tight contest where penalties were pretty much the order of the day. And you didn't really grasp all that had transpired until after the fact. You knew South Africa were going to show hard. You knew they were going to be as committed as they could be. You just probably didn't understand all that had gone into the week and all the challenges that have faced the All Blacks. And we'll talk about those, because they need to be talked about, and they need to be talked about in such a way where it doesn't diminish what happened to the Springboks, because it shouldn't diminish what happened to the Springboks. It really has nothing to do with South Africa as came out. But it is realistic in terms of the challenges that face the All Blacks. And so we know the narrative of what transpired, how tight and how pulsating really the contest was. Not necessarily because of, you know, the phases of play, but because of the nature of what was at stake and the closeness and proximity of the teams. One moment that stands out for me, I talked in 1991 about Gavin Hastings' missed penalty. Well, as I think about 95, my favourite player, Andrew Mehrtens, right near the end, Ian Jones wins a line out against the throw. I think it's on the Springboks 22. So they're on defence, and the All Blacks win a line out when it's really least expected, is a prepared term, and they have the ball. It's such a point where if they score, then it's probably all over. They're in the 22. They decide to plant it, as in the forwards, and they set up for a drop kick. It's only 22 metres out, pretty much. It's right out in front. This could be your crowning moment, Mehrtens. This could be the crowning moment for this All Blacks unit. He misses. He misses a drop kick. He will probably kick. He kicks it 100 times. Probably kicks 95, maybe even more. Maybe, well, it won't be 100 because he's missed one. And therefore we have extra time. A definitive moment. A moment that no doubt the man reflects upon in the years that have followed, and will consider until his dying days, I would think. Extra time Opportunity for Joel Stransky this time. Not an easy drop kick, but he nails it. There's still time left, and my memory bank is I cycle back, but the All Blacks can't get close. They can't score the required 3 points, and the unthinkable happens. The Rainbow Nation, or the South African nation, maybe they started to become that Rainbow Nation at that point, or even more so. That was a significant step forward. Mandela presenting the trophy to Francois Pienaar in a Springbok jersey, the very symbol of white nationalism or white oppression, was now viewed as being the one gracing their national rugby team with the spoils of war. They would be Rugby World Cup champions. Maybe even world champions. Maybe that's when it started, actually. The talk about world champions started to grow. And that's when the game also probably found even more so, found a global voice. Because it involved a nation that was clearly outside the bounds of the family of nations, or the family of the globe. And because of the changes that had happened, because of what was transpiring, then people were interested. People were happy. People were glad that there was a measure of flourishing, or a measure of flourishing had returned. And although such a long way to go, and even today, you'll talk to locals, or those who were locals, and they will give various accounts of what life was like. That was a significant moment. And so rugby has been maybe a way, a bridge for South Africa to continue to cross from the past into the future. Because the Springboks were part of the past, but now they have shown themselves as being part of the future. For me, I remember lying on my floor, on the lounge floor, on the carpet, just staying there after the contest. I was so looking forward to the All Blacks winning. Who could beat the All Blacks? Who could beat the All Blacks in this form? Even in South Africa. South Africa found a way. The Springboks played the opponent that was before them, and that's what they could do. And they won the Rugby World Cup 1995. Is the story over for Rugby World Cup 1995? Well, in many respects, it is. However, this is probably a good video to address the elephant-sized Susie in the room. If you know the narrative, you may doubt the narrative, you may scoff at the narrative, you may say this is all part of the New Zealanders trying to find an excuse. Or again, I think that makes it neither or, where I think the narrative is about a both and. Because if you want to say or suggest that the All Blacks, men like Colin Meads, who has the utmost of respect not only for the South African rugby team and South African rugby nation, but one where it's reciprocal. If you want to claim that all the documented evidence about the number of those who are unwell, if you want to say that's all part of some fragile attempt at psychological salvation, psychological sporting salvation, well, I mean, obviously you're free to go there. However, I don't think you have the warrant or even the plausibility structure to be able to say, well, all these individuals got sick. Because I mean, the question is, were they unwell? Well, I think it's pretty reasonable to accept what has been offered by more than one source. So you've got most of the All Blacks becoming unwell in a very short span of time. If it wasn't what they've claimed, then you've got to find another plausible reason to explain it. You can't just say, no, it's rubbish. I don't think you need to. Like, when I've talked to South Africans about this, I've wanted to affirm two things. One, I do think the All Blacks, something happened to them. But two, that has no type of excuse, or it provides no type of justification to stop anyone from saying that the South African Springboks were the rightful world champions of 1995. They played who was in front of them. The All Blacks, in their wisdom, and I think Mike Meads has talked about it after the fact, I think would say lack of wisdom, decided not to say anything about it beforehand and just play the game. You saw pictures of, I think Jeff Wilson is the one, vomiting up on the sideline with it still impacting him. But you hear the players who are documenting it, obviously not wanting to say too much because it just doesn't sound too good, does it? We don't want the bad PR. We don't want to stand out and be ridiculed by others. However, the narrative that has come out about a betting syndicate has nothing to do with South Africa. Has not even identified the Springboks being cause, but some betting syndicate, I think it was in Southeast Asia. No matter where that is or what that is, I think we have seen, even through the example of someone like Hansie Cronje, that to consider nefarious type contexts or practices is not beyond the realms of possibility. And again, no one at this part of the world of any type of status or standing involved with that event has said this is an inside job. In fact, I've spent a lot of time interacting with Springbok supporters and South Africans. They want to play the All Blacks. They don't want a get out of jail card. They don't want an easy beat. In fact, if they knew that this was happening, they would probably out the South Africans who are involved, because that's not how they roll. It doesn't fit their type of, even rugby ethos. They have a great respect for the All Blacks, and therefore have a great respect for what it means, and they want to play the best and they want to beat the best. So I'm happy to affirm, I think it's right to affirm that saying that the All Blacks, however or in whatever way or whatever means transpired, but were all unwell in a consolidated period before the Rugby World Cup, and that obviously had some impact, but they chose to play. They didn't have to. They could have said, this is transpiring, this is happening. And I think that the Springboks or South Africans would have said, we want to play a fit All Blacks team in the final. Something has happened here, and because of the number and the nature of it, then they would have also said, well, that seems quite unusual. It's not normative for that to happen, and therefore let's respond and let's make decisions about when we will play in light of what has transpired. And that would have been, I think, the right way forward. I think that not saying anything was the wrong move. It was the historically rugby move, the rugby culture, even the larger culture that, doesn't say too much. Good on you, mate, is the old line from down south. And you just keep playing on, and maybe, I think that the reasoning was not to show, or not to give the opposition any type of insight into potential weakness. However, that was, I think, a foolish decision in light of hindsight. Now, again, we can all be right in hindsight, so I don't think it's anything we need to be harsh about. So the Springboks won the Rugby World Cup, played the opposition were in front of them. They did all they could do. And therefore saying anything about what was transpiring with the All Blacks does not diminish one iota their victory. You can only play what's in front of you. They didn't have an idea about it beforehand, and there is nothing that's ever been brought up that's indicated they bear any consequences. So I think you can say two things here. You don't have to say that the Springboks are worthy world champions because the All Blacks were somehow, you know, shipshape. I don't think you have to say that. If you think you have to say that the All Blacks were shipshape, therefore only then are the Springboks worthy world champions, I think you miss the both and reality of what was transpiring, not only in this situation, but the reality of life. Sometimes there are two things happening that that are both got to be affirmed, and that both can be affirmed and reconciled, and that don't discount the other. The All Blacks' sickness does not discount the validity of the Springbok victory. And so this is a bit long, this video here, because there is a little bit more to talk about and a little bit more to, I guess, digress upon. And when I rose to attention on you know, social media and with the All Black connection and with even the Springbok connection, discussion about what transpired in '95 came up, and I hope that what I say, you know, honestly and truthfully reflects what transpires. Like, I don't need the All Blacks to be sick or to not be sick to affirm the validity of the Springboks victory. Excuse me, as my throat is giving out, needs a bit of liquid. I blame Susie. She's still haunting my steps. No. When I was younger, when you heard about it, it certainly provided encouragement for some national fervour. But as we journey and mature, and as we heard more about it, we understood that what transpired was both significant for the All Blacks, but not significant to South Africa or to the Springboks. And so communicating this, I think, you know, truth fears no questions. And so we've got to be able to, like, we've got to be able to talk about these things. And often life is messy. Often the truth is messy. And we want black and white. When I say black and white, I mean this or this. I mean, that's part of the modern media ensemble. So you've got to state strong opinions. Strong opinions so that someone either really agrees with you or really disagrees with you, but more so they engage. Because if you just provide a nuanced argument, then it's, one, it takes more time to understand. Two, it's maybe hard to understand. Three, it doesn't raise the emotional fervour, which means people don't engage. The sad part is truth is sacrificed. And so my own journey, my own ethic, if you could say, my own ethos is one to, you know, truth bears no question. So speak the truth. Speak the truth. But do so in such a way that honours also the nuance, but, you know, is not beholden to either my own nation on the sporting field or another's, because you can go both ways. You can overcompensate, and sometimes that happens even in commentary. So that was Rugby World Cup 1995. The Springboks back in the fold of nations, back in the rugby fold of nations, and now very much a part of what would happen going forward. 95 would be painful. It would be painful for All Black supporters and for a New Zealand nation that now had 2 Rugby World Cups of failure. But it would be close to that tournament, or in close proximity to that tournament, where something significant would happen. We're going to start the next video with that, which is really important for an All Blacks nation, because this one is long enough at 40 minutes. I trust you've enjoyed this personal take down Rugby World Cup memory lane. It's through my own lens, through my own memory, through my own journey as one who has lived each and every Rugby World Cup to a greater or lesser degree. And so I encourage you to share your own reflections. If you're a Springbok or South African supporter, How was it? What's your greatest memory? What stands out? What do you think of Susie? I know some, after I've talked about it and given what I think is an honest take of it, then a lot of the heat's taken out. Too many New Zealanders, too many All Black supporters have used it as a way of providing redemption for their rugby team's failures. And that shouldn't be. One, you shouldn't find redemption through your rugby team. Yes, support your rugby team. Yes, be passionate about your rugby team. Yes, be patriotic. But, you know, there are greater things and more significant things. Even as rugby is an important part of our sporting and cultural code. So, for you Springbok supporters, or for you neutrals even, what are your memories, what are your reflections? And for All Black supporters, where does 95 stand in sort of the painful reminiscence of a rugby world, of a rugby journey, of a rugby culture? What say you? Rugby World Cup 1999 is next. Rugby again heads north. It's not one, if this video is a bit longer, that potentially could be a little bit shorter. Maybe not, because there are still significant moments, and it would be another challenging descent. This has been I Am Johnny King. You're on my YouTube channel. You probably realise that already. I'm wanting to grow this channel. I'm wanting it to be an increasing means for media representation into a rugby world, maybe even a sporting world, we'll see. To do that, a lot of it depends on the engagement and you could say, the response of those watching. So please like and comment and share this piece. Spread it around to the rugby world. Let's reflect on where we've come from and to where we're heading. And please do subscribe. I'd like to think, again, more liking, more thinking, that what will be offered through 2023 will be worth the engagement, the free engagement through this channel. I thank you for watching. It's been a decent chunk of time. It's about half time, isn't it, in a rugby contest? Well, no, they extend for stoppages, but yeah, it's getting there. So, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time as we cycle through Le Tour, the story so far at the Rugby World Cup.